fallen asleep, this microphone might wake you up. All right. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Conquest. Okay. Last time we discussed the cities of refuge and the pasture lands for the Levites. And then we got into chapter 22, where Joshua started by commending the Transjordan tribes. That's the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And he said in chapter 22, verse 5, only be very careful to observe the the commandment and the law that Moses, your servant, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God, and to walk in all of his ways, and to keep his commandments, and to cling to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. And this is going to actually be coming up again this week as well. Very similar things that Joshua will say to the people. So what happens, though? When they get to the Jordan, these 2.5 tribes, they build a large altar. It's an exact copy of the altar that God commanded be built by the tabernacle. Maybe not exact, but it does say it's a copy, is what they call it. So the other tribes, they hear about this altar, and they're ready to start a civil war over it. And a commission that's led by the high priest's son, Phinehas, is sent to investigate. And after accusing the Transjordan tribes of rebelling against the Lord, these tribes make their defense. And they say that they're only building the altar as a witness between the tribes, that they would always worship the Lord as God, even if the tribes west of the Jordan would prohibit it. And the chapter ends with the people of Reuben and the people of Gad called the altar witness, for they said it as a witness between us, that the Lord is God. So after hearing this, the commission returns to the rest of the people and explains the situation, and the situation is resolved. And we discussed how both sides in this conflict assumed the worst of the other side, but that peace prevailed once they listened to each other. I think it's a unique encounter in the Old Testament that we get insight into what both sides are afraid of. You have the Transjordan tribes being afraid of being cut off from the tabernacle, from the worship of the Lord, and you have the other tribes being worried about a rebellion against the Lord, and then being found guilty by association and maybe bringing on, a plague or pestilence. So at the end of class, I was trying to get through the class at the end. We kind of ran out of time, so I said if I'd give you a chance for any comments now. After class, Jake Collins came up to me, and he pointed out something and said, hey, bring that up next week, and he said, I'm out of town. So I'll relay it to you. He pointed out, so I said that Joshua, they didn't send the warrior, they didn't send the general on this commission, but Jake pointed out rightly that Phinehas was not just a meek priest, he wasn't just a spiritual leader. Phinehas was actually the one that stopped the plague at Peor when he drove a spear through an Israelite and a Canaanite that were fornicating. And Phinehas was also sent as a signalman in the battle against the Midianites in Numbers chapter 31, in the battle in which Balaam was killed. So Phinehas wasn't just a spiritual authority. In a sense, Jake was saying he's a warrior priest. So it's not, when he brings up Peor in this commission, people know to take him seriously. I'm kind of wondering if he's holding a spear when he's making that, discussion. It's like, So, other comments, other thoughts on what we discussed last week? I know it was last week, but if you had any other thoughts, I want to give you guys a chance for it. Yes, Ed. Here, I can get it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that verse 5 in chapter 22 is just a jewel.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think if we would really put our hearts and souls into the kingdom, Yeah, I think that's what we need.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for the comment. Yeah, verse 5 really is a jewel, and it's again going to be repeated in these next two chapters, so we'll get to dig into that a little bit too. Some of the very same themes. Other thoughts? And we're just kind of hopping back into it. Okay, let's move on then. So tonight we're going to talk about faithful for life. Okay, so let's set the scene a little bit. You're viewing the side of a mountain. It's a desolate, rocky place. It's getting to be late in the evening, maybe. You see a man, and by now you recognize this man as Joshua, but he's looking younger again. Maybe he's 35 to 40 years old. He's sitting near the base of the mountain, alone, and he appears a little anxious. He's looking up the mountain, and then he's looking away from the mountain, straining to hear the sounds in the distance. Joshua sees a man approaching from up on the mountain. As he approaches, we see that he's an older man, and he's carrying 2 stone tablets with writing on them. Let's take a look at Exodus chapter 32. Exodus 32, starting in verse 15. Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets that were written on both sides, on the front and on the back they were written. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, "There is a noise of war in the camp." But he said, "It is not the sound of shouting for victory, or the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear." And as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it with fire and ground it to powder and scattered it on the water and made the people of Israel drink of it. Okay, so Joshua is there. He's looking out from a distance at the people. He's hearing the commotion in the camp. And coming closer with Moses and witnessing the scene of idolatry, rebellion against God, and debauchery, we can only wonder at the state of Joshua's perspective. But he's right there besides Moses. So let's fast forward. It's a long time afterwards. At this point, we fade out and fade back in on the face of Joshua. And he's an elderly man now, and he's in front of a large crowd of men. Let's turn to Joshua 23. A long time afterward, when the Lord had given rest to Israel from all their surrounding enemies, and Joshua was old and well advanced in years, Joshua summoned all Israel, its elders and heads, its judges and officers, and said to them, "I am now old and well advanced in years, and you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. For it is the Lord your God who has fought for you. Behold, I have allotted to you as an inheritance for your tribes those nations that remain, along with all the nations that I have already cut off, from the Jordan to the great sea in the west. The Lord your God will push them back before you and drive them out of your sight. And you shall possess their land, just as the Lord your God promised you." Okay, so this could be something like 20 years after the end of the conquest and the allotment of the land. Joshua has called together Israel's leaders, and he's reminded them about how the Lord has fought for them and how the Lord has kept his promise that they would possess this land. Let's keep reading what he has to say to the leaders of Israel. Verse 6. "Therefore, be very strong to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, turning aside from it neither to the right hand nor to the left, that you may not mix with these nations that remain among you, or make mention of the names of their gods, or swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them. But you shall cling to the Lord your God, just as you have done to this day. For the Lord has driven out before you great and strong nations. And as for you, no man has been able to stand before you to this day. One man of you puts to flight 1,000, since it is the Lord your God who fights for you, just as he promised you. Be very careful, therefore, to love the Lord your God. For if you turn back and cling to the remnant of these nations remaining among you, and make marriages with them, so that you associate with them, and they with you. Know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you, but they shall be a snare and a trap for you, a whip on your sides and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from off this good ground that the Lord your God has given you. Okay, so back to verse 6. He starts by saying, therefore, because of these things, be very strong. This is Joshua's opportunity. It's his turn to turn the tables. Everyone's been telling Joshua this whole time throughout the book. We start the book of Joshua with be strong and courageous, be very strong and courageous. Now it's time for him, as we talked about in the first lesson, to pass on the baton to the next generation, to the leaders behind him. And he's instructing them with that same instruction, be very strong. And he also points out the snare of the peoples around him. In verse 7, he describes a progression to idolatry if they turn aside from God's law. Now, this verse is it's loaded with the Hebrew word for no. I got to go over to Israel on 3 separate occasions for work, and I didn't pick up a lot of Hebrew. Not having a shared alphabet is a real hindrance to learning a language. I learned a couple of things, right? Like Boker Tov is like good day or good morning. Maim is water. I want some water. I'm thirsty. In Hebrew, kin is yes, and lo is no. We were used to like lo, lo, lo. It's like no, no, no. That's this verse right here. That's verse 7. Verse 7 is lo, lo, lo. It's no, no, no. Where in your Bibles you might see or nor, or neither in your translation. It's no, no, no. So what does this progression look like? Well, that you may not, verse 7, right? That you may not mix with these nations that remain among you. Okay, so it starts with mixing with them, being polluted by the world, by their culture. And then make mention of the names of their gods. Maybe it's a little bit of, like, tell me a little bit more about Molech. What do you guys believe in this Canaanite god? Maybe you start talking about it, showing interest in it, because you're showing interest in the people, want to be polite. And then it's swear by them. Okay, now you're making deals with the Canaanites, and you're doing it on their terms, right? These guys don't swear by Yahweh, they don't swear by the Lord, but they do swear by Ashtoreth, so I'll go along with that. And then suddenly bowing down to them, eventually, finally worshiping their gods. But the Israelites are called to be different, to be a holy people. So how could they do that? Well, let's take a look at verse 8. But you shall cling, I'll put it up here on the screen as well. But you shall cling to the Lord your God, just as you have done to this day. And this is, again, very similar to what Joshua has instructed the Transjordan tribes in 22:5. He says, cling to him, cling to the Lord. Now, I've highlighted that word in yellow on the screen. Here's what it looks like in Hebrew, which, again, I can't read. I'm not going to pretend that I can read it. But I was able to find it in the middle there after some searching. And this word is dabak. There's the characters for that. Again, Hebrew is right to left, which is another way to just confuse me. So this word is used in other verses, maybe most famously in this verse. So does anyone in the room read Hebrew? Maybe. Anyone got a stab at what this verse would be? This is Genesis 2:24. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. That same word, dabak, cling, hold fast, depending on your translation, it might say be joined to. So it's the same word that we today use to describe marriage. And again, if we look at verse 11, it seems very fitting. He's talking about loving the Lord your God. I think we can keep going with this marriage analogy. We need to be very careful to love those most precious to us in our relationships. And how can we do that? We can invest in those relationships. When we love our spouses, we invest in them our time, our resources, our focus, our affection. And it's the same with God. And also the context is suggesting marriage. When we look at verse 7 again, it was talking about mixing with those nations. And then verse 12, he says, if you turn back and cling to the remnant of the nations and make marriages with them. This word is again in that verse as well. And then verse 13 ends with a warning that what would happen if they turned away from the Lord. He says it's going to be, these nations will be a snare and a trap for them, a whip on your sides and thorns in your eyes. And sadly, again, we know the rest of the story, that that's actually what's going to happen. It's going to be a huge problem for them. I'll pause there for a second. Anything before I continue on? Okay, let's keep going. Let's take a look at verse 14. And now I am about to go the way of all the earth, and you know in your hearts and souls, all of you, that not one word has failed of all the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you. All have come to pass for you, not one of them has failed. But just as all the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you have been fulfilled for you, so the Lord will bring upon you all the evil things until he has destroyed you from off this good land that the Lord your God has given you. If you transgress the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and you shall perish quickly from off the good land that he has given you. Okay, and there's verse 14, where he says, I'm going the way of all the earth. And then he says, all have come to pass. Not one word has failed you. I wrote in my margin here, this is also repeated in chapter 23, verse 5, early in this chapter. It's also repeated in 21:45. This is a common theme as well. Joshua is noting God has been faithful. And he's going somewhere with that as well. He's telling them to be faithful in turn. So this is Joshua's farewell address to the leaders of Israel. And it makes sense for him to start with the leaders. These are the people that will be directing Israel once Joshua is gone. And as we'll see at the end of chapter 24, I don't know where I got 41 from. Let's just go ahead and take a look there. 24:31. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel. So we see this in some ways being effective. The leaders that are still around still remember Joshua. He had a lasting impact on their faithfulness, on their leadership as well. So his message is a reminder of the blessings and the curses of the covenant that they have with God. But again, it's a reminder that they have already seen the blessings of the Lord in this conquest. And it's also a warning that if they don't stay faithful, the curses are coming. So this is the same man that witnessed multiple times how God's people could quickly turn away from him, even in the shadow of everything that they saw on Mount Sinai. And we could have looked at that as well, right? The very presence of God on this mountaintop, and there's thunder and lightning, a thick cloud, there's a sound of a trumpet. They've seen all these things, and it didn't take them but 40 days to turn back to idolatry. And then after that, this is the same Joshua that saw how the people rebelled instead of going into the promised land initially. The faithfulness of the people of Israel, this is now his greatest concern and his greatest focus as his time is coming to an end. Okay, any other thoughts on Joshua's address to the leaders? Okay. This is actually where we started the class at the beginning of the quarter. It looks like we've kind of caught up to the end because we started at the end. All right, into chapter 24. Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and summoned the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers of Israel. So after speaking with the leaders, Joshua gathers the people at Shechem. And why Shechem if the tabernacle is at Shiloh? We pointed out that Shiloh is kind of like the first capital of Israel in the new land. Well, Shechem is near Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. This is where Joshua erected an altar in chapter 8 and repeated the law to the people. And Shechem also has a lot of significance for the patriarchs as well. In Genesis 12, when Abram first enters Canaan, he stops first at Shechem and builds an altar there. And it's at Shechem that God first promises to give the land of Canaan to Abram's offspring. So it has a special significance there. Let's take a look at the next several verses. Verse 2. And Joshua said to all the people, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Long ago your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates, Terah, the father of Abraham and of Nahor, and they served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and made his offspring many. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. And I gave Esau the hill country of Seir to possess. But Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. And I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt with what I did in the midst of it, and afterward I brought you out. Then I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came to the sea. And the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. And when they cried to the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians, and made the sea come upon them and cover them. And your eyes saw what I did in Egypt, and you lived in the wilderness a long time. Then I brought you to the land of the Amorites, who lived on the other side of the Jordan. They fought with you, and I gave them into your hand, and you took possession of their land, and I destroyed them before you. Then Balak the son of Zippor, king of Moab, arose and fought against Israel. And he sent and invited Balaam the son of Beor to curse you, but I would not listen to Balaam. Indeed, he blessed you. So I delivered you out of his hand. And you went over to the Jordan and came to Jericho, and the leaders of Jericho fought against you. And also the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And I gave them into your hand. And I sent the hornet before you, which drove them out before you, the two kings of the Amorites. It was not by your sword or by your bow. I gave you a land on which you have not labored, and cities that you have not built, and you dwell in them. You eat the fruit of the vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant. Okay, so God is giving He's giving his people a history lesson, and Joshua is the mouthpiece. If we look again at verse 2, Joshua says, the Lord says this. Okay? So I have to again ask myself why. Why history? I enjoy history. I know Tommy enjoys history. But not everyone does. Shame on you. No, I'm just kidding. So, but why a history lesson? Well, we continually need to be reminded about God and what he has done in our lives and his great works. And there's a reason why we take the Lord's Supper every Sunday. We're very forgetful. Again, the people at Sinai, they're already forgetting or choosing to not place as much importance after just 40 days. So there's several things of interest in this history lesson. First of all, in verse 2 again, it says of Abraham that he was there with his family on the other side of the Euphrates, and they served gods. And this is the verse that kind of, puts to rest, well, maybe he was a faithful man in Ur of the Chaldeans. And we don't really know what Abraham's relationship is with God at that time before he was called out. But we do know that he's in a place where they're serving other gods. He's in a place of idolatry. And God makes it clear that he called Abram out from a life of worshiping false gods. Also notice how he's describing the patriarchs in verses 2 through 5. He says, I took your fathers, and he's giving a very brief rundown of the patriarchs. But really, he starts switching it over in verse 7 when he starts saying you and your, and I tried to accentuate that a little bit. So he keeps saying what he did for them. Your eyes saw what I did in Egypt. You lived in the wilderness. I delivered you out of the hand of Balaam. I delivered these people into your hand. So this isn't just some abstract history lesson for those that like history. This is their history. This is the history of these people. And God's pointing out that he has very much been at the center of it all. He's been involved in it. This has been by his hand that these things have happened. It's also interesting to me, verse 12, God mentions that he sent the hornet before you. That's an interesting phrase, and there's some debate over what it means. It's also mentioned in Deuteronomy 7:20 that God would send the hornet, and Exodus 23:28. So there's some debate if these are actual literal hornets or if this is a metaphorical way to describe the terror that God will bring on the Canaanite people. When we were looking at earlier in the book, we were considering, for example, chapter 10. When we look at Joshua 10, verse 9, so Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal, and the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who struck them with a great blow at Gibeon. And God's going to send large hailstones as well, but God throws them into a panic. So there's some discussion that maybe the hornet is this terror that God will send. But again, if we come on back to chapter 24, it could very much be literal. Zorah is in the land of Judah. This is actually Samson's hometown, and that literally translates to a place of hornets. So it might be literal hornets as well, which is, again, I think it's just kind of interesting. This is a phrase thrown in there a couple times. Okay, so what's Joshua's conclusion from this? Now therefore, let's look at verse 14. Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. So this passage here it's loaded with, because of these things, do these things, right? He starts off with saying, therefore. Therefore what? Because of all that God has done, we serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. So serve God, fear him, revere him, be faithful to him. He's been faithful to you. He has blessed you, now be faithful to him. Put away the gods that your fathers served. So idolatry is already a problem in Israel, and now Joshua is going to confront this problem head on. It's time to address it. And then probably the most famous verse of the entire book, Joshua says, "And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Joshua 24:15. And what a great example of both a leader and a father in this verse. It's decision time. The people of Israel will have to choose what they're going to do. And they can't have it both ways. They can't serve other gods and the Lord as well. It doesn't work that way with God. I mean, maybe it works that way with Moloch. Maybe he doesn't care that you serve Ashtoreth as well. I don't really know. I don't know what Moloch does because it's not real. But God doesn't work that way. And like a father, Joshua is confronting the children of Israel. It's time for them to stop being spiritually unfaithful. And as a father, there's no doubt that Joshua is the leader of his house. He says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." No doubt about it. God will be present in his home and no other God. Okay, so let's see how the people respond. Verse 16. Then the people answered, "Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who brought us and our fathers up from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and who did those great signs in our sight and preserved us in all the way that we went, and among all the peoples through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples, the Amorites who lived in the land. Therefore, we will also serve the Lord, for he is our God." Okay, so the people respond that they will serve the Lord as God. Let's keep reading, verse 19. "But Joshua said to the people, 'You are not able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions or your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do you harm and consume you after having done you good.' And the people said to Joshua, 'No, but we will serve the Lord.' Then Joshua said to the people, 'You are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord to serve him.' And they said, 'We are witnesses.'" So the people, they say, "Okay, we're with you. We choose the Lord." And Joshua goes, "I don't know if you really understand what you're doing. Are you sure? It almost reads a little bit like reverse psychology. No, you're not actually able to do this." I have to wonder if he's having his own flashbacks to those times of Israel's unfaithfulness. I wonder if he's flashing back to the golden calf and thinking, "You guys, you're not able to serve the Lord, not for any length of time." But he also reminds them again, he reminds them that God won't have it both ways. God is holy. He's not part of a pantheon. He's not just an altar to an unknown God amongst other gods. He's the only God. He doesn't accept worship just amongst other gods. And again, Joshua has seen this firsthand. And sadly, he's already seen in the span of 20 or 30 years from the time of the conquest being completed, he's already seen that foreign gods are coming in. That's why he's telling them you have to make this choice today. So what do? They insist that they will serve the Lord. Okay, so how does Joshua respond? Verse 23, he said, "Then put away the foreign gods that are among you, and incline your heart to the Lord, the God of Israel." So Joshua tells them again, this is the second time he's told them, they need to put away the foreign gods. Idol worship, it's a cancer, or maybe it's thought of as like an insidious virus in ancient cultures. It needed to be rooted out in Israel. So while Joshua is speaking, we see he's not far away from a large tree. Now let's cut away from him for a moment and just look at this tree. And maybe it's now about 525 years earlier. There's a man meeting his family under the shade of a large tree. It might be the same tree, or it could just be of the same kind, the terebinth tree. Let's take a look at Genesis 35 and read the first 4 verses. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Put away the foreign gods that are among you, and purify yourselves, and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to the God who answers me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had, and the rings that were in their ears. Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree that was near Shechem. So, set in the context here, Jacob is back in Canaan, and it's been a difficult journey. He's had the fear of meeting Esau. His daughter, Dinah, has been raped. 2 of his sons have massacred a town in retribution. And he doesn't know it yet, but soon he's going to lose his beloved wife, Rachel, in childbirth as well. In the middle of all this, God has called him to build an altar at Bethel, at the place named by Jacob after he dreamed of a stairway to heaven. And Jacob recognizes God's faithfulness. What does he say? He says, "God answers me in the day of my distress and has been with me wherever I have gone." This is a man who could have easily said, "I've had a lot of stress. I've gone through a lot of things. I've had it." But instead, he sees God's faithfulness. But there's a problem. Before they can leave, they need to purify themselves. There are foreign gods in Jacob's house, and they need to be put away. So they're buried beneath the terebinth tree. Okay, let's go back to Joshua 24. Let's take a look at 24 through 28. "And the people said to Joshua, 'The Lord our God we will serve, and his voice we will obey.' So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day, and put in place statutes and rules for them at Shechem. And Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God. And he took a large stone and set it up there under the terebinth that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. And Joshua said to all the people, 'Behold, this stone shall be a witness against us, for it has heard all the words of the Lord that he has spoken to us. Therefore it shall be a witness against you, lest you deal falsely with your God.' So Joshua sent the people away, every man to his inheritance." So Joshua makes a covenant with the people. Perhaps this is a new covenant. It does mention rules and statutes. Maybe it's probably just a renewal of the law of Moses. And then he sets up a large stone under the terebinth tree that's near the tabernacle. I think it's an interesting parallel back to the time of Jacob. God's holiness in the tabernacle is close to this terebinth tree where foreign gods could be buried. And Joshua, in a sense, he's putting a tombstone over those gods as a witness against the people to be faithful. We're getting real close here. Any thoughts before I go on? Thoughts or comments? Ed?
To me, it looks like they took an oath.
Mm-hmm.
They actually gave an oath 5 times. If you count them out, I was counting them out here. So there were 5 oaths that the people took and agreed with Joshua, but unfortunately it didn't last.
Yeah.
Why? Because they didn't remember. They forgot.
Yep. Yeah, good point. Yeah, he continually challenges them, and they continually insist that they're ready to follow the Lord. Yeah, good point. Okay, let's get into this. I know we only have 5 minutes, so this will probably be where we pick up next week as well. After these things, verse 29, Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in his own inheritance at Timnath-Serah, which is in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gash. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel. So Joshua dies at 110 years old. He's buried in his inheritance. And there's again that picture of what Timnath-Serah looks like today and where they're beginning excavations. So what should we say about Joshua? And this is again probably where I'd like to get to next week, but let's start into it tonight. What would be a fitting epitaph to Joshua? Kind of like that old, I think it was like a Tombstone pizza commercial. What would you put on your tombstone? What would you put on Joshua's tombstone? Well, how about this? How about faithful for life? Joshua served the Lord all the days of his life. He was faithful even in the midst of a faithless people. When sent to spy out the land of Canaan, he trusted in God's promises. When called to lead his people into that land, he accepted his commission from the Lord himself. He led his people through several years of conquest, and Joshua wasn't perfect. Sometimes he acted rashly and without consulting God. For example, when the Israelites attacked Ai the first time, which ended in defeat, and also famously when they made a rash covenant with the Gibeonites. Now, these might have been mistakes. I think we could acknowledge that. But they weren't faithless actions. It wasn't in search for the wrong kind of goal. And it certainly wasn't a rebellion against the Lord. Joshua never wavered in his faithfulness to the command of Moses and to the command of God, and he never wavered in his duty for his people. He was faithful in dividing up the land. And after the division, Joshua recognized a problem among his people in these foreign gods. He reminded them of the need to serve God alone, and as a leader, he made it abundantly clear where his loyalties lied and who his house would serve. Joshua was a man who was faithful to God his entire life. And I think that's a great example of faithfulness for us today. And as we look at chapters 23 and 24, they're brimming with faithfulness. The faithfulness of God to his people, the faithfulness of Joshua to his God. And it's a great encouragement to us today. Yes, Richard. Yeah, that Richard. Either Richard. Both Richards. Can you do a duet comment?
No, I was just combing my hair.
Richard.
I'd comb mine if I had some. But I was thinking about Joshua, and you said, what epitaph, before you put up faithful for life, I leaned over to Lori and said, always faithful.
Always faithful.
And he's really in rare air in the Bible, because there are like 4 men in the Bible where nothing negative is ever said about them. You know, Joshua is one of them. Daniel is one of them. Elisha, I think maybe Joseph.
Joseph, yeah.
You know, I mean, that's really, I mean, to live that kind of life, and as sinful as we are, you know, obviously these men, none of these men were perfect, but yeah, I think that's really rare as you look into the life of Joshua, especially the times in which he lived as he tried to conquer the land. Had to be a lot of stress in his life throughout that period.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, great thought. Oh, so Richard does have a comment now. Oh.
Yeah, well, that made me think about our situation today. Ginger and I, through our studies, we've been going through Judges and Samuel and so forth, and we find time and time and time and time and time again, they continually leave God.
Yeah.
Always. And we're no different today.
Yeah, good point. Okay, well, we're just about done. There's still 2 more verses in the book. And we will cover those next week, and I think then we've got some time to get into the beginning of Judges as a sort of epilogue. So hope you'll be here next week. Thank you.